Let me tell you something quietly about a certain kind of person who has always felt slightly misplaced in their own timeline. Someone who walks through life with the unsettling sense that they've lived far more years than their body reveals. If you're here, listening, breathing a bit slower than before, then you already know what I'm talking about. You've been told you're mature for your age, wise beyond your years, composed in ways most people struggle to understand. Yet none of those compliments have ever felt like praise to you. They feel like reminders that something in you grew up faster than it should have, that the innocence meant to shape your early years was replaced by a kind of emotional gravity you never asked for. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something gently and directly. When did you first notice that you were carrying responsibilities, feelings, or burdens that didn't belong to someone your age? Most people brush off that question, but you can't. Because somewhere in your life, maybe in childhood, maybe in adolescence, maybe in the years right after, you were pushed into a kind of inner adulthood long before the outer one arrived. And ever since then, you've been walking through life with a mind that feels seasoned, cautious, prepared, and strangely tired, even when you're surrounded by people who still seem to be playing at life the way children play games they don't fully understand. Psychologists call this phenomenon premature emotional development. But if you've lived it, you don't need a label to know that it shapes everything. How you think, how you trust, how you love, how you choose your battles, and how you protect yourself from the edges of a world that often feels too loud, too careless, too unexamined. People who feel older than their age tend to share an invisible history. They are the children who watched instead of played, the teens who observed instead of jumped in, the young adults who learned caution before they learned freedom. They are the people who noticed tension in rooms before others noticed the weather. They are the ones who sensed unspoken fears in their parents' voices, or who absorbed the emotional climate of their family like a sponge absorbing a storm. This deep attunement to reality may look like maturity to the outside world, but inside, it feels like the emotional equivalent of being handed a life manual decades too early. Nietzsche once said that some people are born posthumously, meaning they come into the world carrying a kind of depth that only makes sense much later in life. But the truth is more complex. People who feel older than their age often become that way because life demanded they grow before they were ready. They learn to read faces instead of stories. They learn to predict reactions instead of explore possibilities. They learn to soothe others instead of be soothed. And the result is a mind that sees through illusions naturally, effortlessly, almost painfully. This ability to sense things early becomes both a gift and a curse. You can see through false intentions. You can detect emotional danger before it forms. You interpret silence as clearly as words. But you also struggle to rest. You struggle to trust. You struggle to be spontaneous. The world feels like a place where everything must be anticipated, analyzed, understood before you allow yourself to breathe in it. Plato believed that some souls were old souls, not in age but in experience, and that their wisdom came from confronting truths others avoided. Yet even Plato acknowledged the cost. Awareness always demands something from you, and people like you have paid that cost in attentiveness, in caution, in a kind of internal vigilance that never fully turns off. But this is where the story begins to shift. Because while people often misunderstand this old soul heaviness, the truth is that feeling older than your age doesn't come from wisdom alone. It comes from carrying too much, too early. It comes from watching people you love struggle and stepping in before they asked. It comes from filling emotional roles no one explained, roles you stepped into, not because you wanted to, but because someone had to. It comes from understanding fear before you understood yourself. And that's the part most people never see, the emotional exhaustion behind the maturity, the quiet sadness behind the composure, the longing behind the calm. People who feel older than their age often carry a specific type of loneliness, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of feeling unseen. Others admire your stability without noticing the weight behind it. They value your advice without asking who advises you. They rely on your strength without wondering what happens when you collapse internally. And you don't blame anyone. You've never been the type to blame, but you do sometimes wonder what it would feel like to be around people who understand without explanation, who see without being shown, who listen without needing a performance of clarity. Machiavelli might have admired your strategic thinking, your ability to see through human nature with accuracy and precision, but even he would admit that the mind becomes sharp long before the heart becomes soft. And softening is what you struggle with now. You feel too much, so you've learned to feel in private. You need understanding, so you pretend you don't. You crave connection, so you settle for being useful instead. But here's where the psychological truth enters the conversation. People who feel older than their age often confuse stability with suppression. You've trained yourself to endure rather than express, to analyze rather than ask, to internalize rather than risk being misunderstood. You sustain yourself on clarity, but you starve yourself of vulnerability. You want to be strong, but you don't know how to be held. This emotional self-containment is survival, but it's not living, and you know that. You've always known it. Somewhere inside you is a quiet longing to be allowed to be young, not in age, but in spirit, to laugh without calculating, to desire without apologizing, to trust without preparing for disappointment. Bonhoeffer believed that freedom begins not with the absence of constraints, but with the courage to step into one's own truth. And for someone like you, that truth is simple. You've spent years being older than you had to be. Now the real journey is learning how to reclaim the parts of you that were postponed, hidden, or silenced. This doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or careless. It means learning to separate maturity from emotional heaviness. It means exploring joy without guilt. It means allowing softness to exist alongside intelligence. It means giving yourself permission to experience life instead of just managing it. Think about the last time you allowed yourself to be unguarded. Not reckless, just open. Not vulnerable, just honest. Do you remember the feeling? The looseness in your chest? The way your breath felt less like a responsibility and more like an invitation? That feeling wasn't immaturity. It was alignment. Your maturity became a mask long before it became a skill. And every time you outgrew someone or outthought a situation or outfelt an environment, it was because your mind was already in a different stage of life. But your heart, your emotional world, your unspoken desires, they were waiting for the part of your life where you finally get to live for yourself rather than react to life around you. People like you often assume they know who they are because they've spent years examining themselves. But introspection is not identity. Insight is not embodiment. Understanding is not living. You've mastered observation. Now it's time to master participation. You've mastered endurance. Now it's time to master expression. You've mastered responsibility. Now it's time to master receiving. Because here is the truth you've avoided, but also secretly hoped was real. You don't feel older because you are older. You feel older because you've been carrying life on your shoulders instead of in your hands. And shoulders grow tired long before hands do. The next phase of your life doesn't require you to abandon your depth, your wisdom, your old soul awareness. It asks something far more challenging. It asks you to become young again, to rediscover curiosity without fear, to feel without analyzing, to trust without bracing, to rest without guilt, to want without shame. There is a version of you who never got to exist fully, a version shaped not by burden, but by possibility. That version is not gone. They're simply waiting for you to turn inward with gentleness instead of discipline. Because feeling older than your age is not a sentence, it's a story. And every story can evolve the moment the narrator decides to live differently. And maybe, just maybe, this is the moment your story begins to shift, from carrying life to finally inhabiting it, from enduring existence to actually experiencing it, from being older than your age to being exactly who you were always meant to be, not in years, but in truth. And if something in this felt like it was speaking directly to you, then stay close for what comes next. Subscribe only if you want to keep understanding yourself on a deeper level.